I would sit out into the woods, hide in the woods in the brush and watch the sun set over the mountains. And then all of a sudden, once the dark came out, that's when I started having these experiences and started hearing these voices and whispers.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Odd Virginia, the only talk show, as far as I'm aware, that exclusively covers paranormal events and the inexplicable within the realms of the Commonwealth. My name's Alex Koska, and I'll be your host for the show. And tonight we've got an interview with a friend of mine who goes way back. We went to high school together. As long as I've known this guy, I didn't know he had any sort of paranormal experiences to share until he reached out to me and asked to come on the show. And I was like, yeah, of course you can. Wait, what? How come this is my first time hearing about these things? So Dexter's going to share with us some of his stories from growing up in a very rural area of Virginia here in the Shenandoah Valley. But before we get to Dexter's interview, I just want to really briefly give you a few updates about the show, where it's headed, and how it's doing. We made it through October, the baptism of fire, and I was uploading a single episode every Friday, which was a bit of a rigorous upload schedule for me at the time. I realized I needed to cut it back, so now I'm uploading half that much, which means I have a little bit more leeway in being able to find interviews, get them recorded, edited, and put up in time. But just like a lot of you listening, I work a full-time job. I come home from work pooped every evening, and I pour myself a cup of coffee and I sit down at my computer desk and I prepare the episode. It takes about maybe 6 hours to get an episode ready for airing. And in saying that, I drink a lot of coffee. So this is going to be the only time I ask. I don't really like asking for money, but if you want to contribute to that coffee fund so I can keep this entertainment going for you, I put a link in the description of the show where you can click and make a $2 donation for my next cup of coffee. You don't have to do it. The coffee will be here whether you donate or not. These will also help pay the distribution costs to keep the podcast up on all the platforms that we currently host it on. And we're up on about 15 different platforms, from YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher. I've got a follower base on Stitcher that I have no idea how it happened. I've never advertised that we're on Stitcher, but I've recently been contacted by someone who found us on TuneIn. We're on Google Podcasts, just all sorts of different podcast platforms you can find the show. So if you want to just make that small donation, it can be a one-time donation, it can be a recurring monthly donation. Just check the show notes if you got a couple extra bucks to spare, and that's probably the last I'll ever mention it. I want to thank everyone who's been tuning into the show. Your listenership really means a lot to me, and I'm not a marketing guy. I don't enjoy marketing. I like doing the audio work and putting a show together and uploading it. So if you've had any enjoyment from listening to the show, please share it with somebody else that you might think would be interested in this kind of topic. And if you want to share your story on the show, you can send us an email at oddvirginia@protonmail.com. That's oddvirginia@protonmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Just send me a little message about whatever might have happened, and we'll be in touch. The stories that are shared on the show are not for the purposes of gawking and poking fun at people who have weird and unusual stories. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This is kind of a way that we can all get together and show each other that, hey, you're not crazy. I saw something weird too. Because here at Odd Virginia,
we're ready to believe you.
All right, today on the show, I've got Dexter here in the studio, and he's come down to tell us about some of his stories, none of which I've heard before. But Dexter, thank you for coming down, and how you doing?
Great, Alex. Thank you for having me out here. It's great to be here.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine, man. Before we get started, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, just a brief bio.
Well, my name's Dexter. I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I actually grew up here in the Shenandoah Valley, and got a lot of stories to tell, and yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to hear them. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. You told me that the story that you're talking about takes place in Deerfield, which isn't too terribly far from here.
Yeah, that is correct. It's actually out in the mountains. It's basically the middle of nowhere, I could say. It's just a very, very small town. Well, I wouldn't even call it a town. It's almost like a village because there's just not very many people out there. And there's a lot that kind of goes on out there, to say the least, because, well, when you don't have a lot of people, things happen.
Yeah, Deerfield really is out in the middle of nowhere. If you were driving through it, you would have no idea that it was a town or a village at all, almost, if you didn't go down the main road. It is sparse, a couple trailers maybe here and there, I think there's actually a bit of a renown to Deerfield for being sort of like an out-of-the-way meth production sort of area.
Yeah. To say the least. I mean, there's like I said, a lot of things that happen out there.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the scariest things really do happen in these rural, nobody village areas.
Yeah. Uh, and I mean, there's many things too that I can. Well, let's just say the least that it's not just only paranormal. There's many experiences that people have out there in Deerfield. So yeah, it's an incredible place, and if you ever are out there, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, there really isn't anything to see in Deerfield. From my experiences out there, I've had some friends out there before that I've gone to hang out with, and it's just nothing. There's woods and there's fields.
Right,
The name kind of gives it away, Deerfield.
right.
So about when did your story take place?
My story takes place when I was a child, actually. I lived on a mountain called Walker Mountain out in Deerfield, and as a child, I was very adventurous, and I would always go out and adventure out through the forest and everything, and explore, see what new things I could see, and yeah, it just happened to be that I had these strange experiences venturing by myself as a child. It took place when I was probably around 7 years old. My family at the time, it was just me, my mother, and my father. And unfortunately, my parents had a little bit of a domestic dispute growing up when I was a kid. And unfortunately, sometimes, some of these experiences would happen to where, as a child, you get frightened and you would run off. So when I was frightened, I would run off into the woods and I would try to hide in the woods as these disputes and arguments would go. And when I was sitting out in the woods, I had these strange experiences of paranormal activity.
I'm curious, real quick. Do you think that the energy involved with these, the negative sort of energy involved with these domestic disputes, sort of followed you out into the woods when you went out there and kind of caused these experiences that you had?
Very possible. The strangest thing, though, is it was just so realistic that it kind of, not only do I remember it, but I think it kind of traumatized me to the point where, I could never forget it because it was just so out of place, so out of normal. And it was just so, I'm trying to think of a good word for it to say because it was just so abnormal. Um,
And I think one reason that a lot of people do when they have these experiences sort of try to brush them off as maybe a figment of their imagination is sort of a way to deal with the not only the trauma of it, but also the mystery of it. Because these are things that aren't supposed to happen, at least according to our scientific knowledge that, in our current understanding of scientific knowledge. So people probably use the brushing off of these experiences as kind of a coping mechanism.
right. And I mean, that's exactly right with it. And the strangest part though was it just, when I was hiding in these woods, I mean, it would start out, in the mid evening. And it was kind of strange because when I would run away, it was still kind of daylight. And I didn't experience these experiences until it was actually dark. So I would sit out into the woods, you know, hide in the woods in the brush until and watch the sun set over the mountains. And then all of a sudden, once the dark came out, that's when I started having these experiences and started hearing these voices and whispers.
Could you tell what they were saying?
A little bit. There was some sentences. It was so quiet, but yet loud enough that you could make some sentences out. Some of them were, um, it was kind of out of place sentences. Um, like one was "go on," um, "run," "we're watching you." I mean, it was very, very short sentences, I guess you could say. And then the other weird experiences too was there was a sound of a breeze that would go through the forest, but every time I would look around, nothing would move. Like no, the leaves on the trees would not move, the brush wouldn't move. I mean, it was the strangest experience ever.
I don't know if it just got colder in here, but I definitely have goosebumps right now.
Yeah, and it's strange because it was like as a kid, I would just sit there and I would hear these voices, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And as a child, you're not, you're so new to the world, so you don't know what exactly what it is. So you just think it's a person, but when you look and there's nobody there, and it sounds like it's right behind you, it's just incredible because it's just like, where's this person? And you look around and you don't hear anything, and then all of a sudden you hear other noises like leaves rustling and limbs breaking and all that stuff, and you don't see anything. So then you start to almost like get into that alert mode and panic mode as a kid, and it you become so frightened to the point where it's like, well, what do I do? Do I run? Do I hide? Do I stay in place? You know?
Yeah, that's completely understandable that you would panic if there's a someone talking to you that you can't see. That would make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I mean, I guess there's a potential danger there if it's saying something like "I'm watching you," but you don't know how to defend yourself against something that's not visible.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing too is it's strange because it was like I'm not the only one that experienced these experiences out there too. That some of my other family members have actually had experiences like this. That even go even farther than that. I had a great grandmother who actually got into an argument with her husband, and one night they, got into a dispute. She got upset, went out into the front porch. She sat there for a little bit, heard a noise around the house, and then she looked around the house and she saw two giant red eyes staring at her from the edge of the corner of the house. And it scared her so bad that she just went right back into the house and never went outside that whole night. I
Yikes.
mean, it was, yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's Deerfield's got some experiences. I mean, there's been evidence of Native American tribes that lived out there. There's been, it's very, I would say, almost kind of like a holy place, but yet mysterious, to say the least.
Do you know which tribe it was that occupied the area?
I do not, unfortunately. And the crazy thing is, if you try to research it, it's almost impossible to find because there's not much information or history on it. The only thing you could find is just the evidence of arrowheads, tomahawk heads, and of course the burial grounds that are out there as well.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find anything after the interview's over. I know that Virginia did have a bit of the Cherokee tribe, but I'm not sure exactly where they live. My history knowledge is not exactly what you might think as a person who's hosting a show called Odd Virginia. I'm not really too deep into the lore, but that's kind of why I'm here doing this as sort of as an education, not only for myself, but for all the listeners.
Right. Yeah, I wish I could give you more info on it, but the thing is, it's the only thing I can say is you have to go out there yourself and experience it yourself. I mean, and once you go out there, you'll see, you'll hear, you'll have the feeling of being watched and basically being patrolled and everything. I mean, it's incredible. It is incredible the atmosphere of not being alone.
Yes, and that's a feeling that's very distinct, and when you get it, you know.
Right. Exactly. So it's funny too because with the Indian burial grounds that are out there, they're kind of not what you think they are. Honestly, most people take them like how the pagans with their ritual with rocks
Right.
and all that, and it's actually it's more simple than that. Honestly, most of the burial grounds out there are honestly just kind of a bunch of pile of rocks, but the only reason why you know they're burial ground is when you come up to them and you see everything that happens around them and you feel it. I had an experience with that too with my uncle who brought me to one. And as soon as we came up upon it, he stopped me and he's like, be very quiet and listen. And so I was like, as a kid, I was also a kid when this happened too. And we sat there and we listened. And once again, it was the same mysteriously being watched. It was like, but there was no one around. And then all of a sudden, this wind sound came, but nothing was moving. So it was like, okay, what's making this noise? And then all of a sudden he nudges me and he's like, we got to go. And so we leave. And I asked him, I was like, what was that? And he's like, that was an Indian burial ground. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. Did you see the rocks? I was like, yeah. I was like, it looked like a pile of rocks. And he's like, no, that was actually the burial ground. And he's like, whatever you do, he's like, don't come here at night. Try to stay away from these because it's very protected by the spirits and everything. And it's like, whoa,
Now, when you heard that sound of the wind, was it sort of like a quick whoosh, or was it a long drawn out gust?
Kind of like a long breeze, like
Okay.
just a long breeze. And it's funny because when I was a kid, when I heard that breeze, that's when I started hearing the whispers. It was like you could hear the whispers in through the breeze too. So it's like, it's not like a regular whisper that you hear from a person. So it's like you hear the breeze and then you hear the voices in the breeze. And it's freaky because it's like once it goes away, it's like completely quiet. And that's also just a scary feeling to feel when, everything becomes completely quiet and you're just sitting there and it's like, okay, what's going to happen next,
Yeah. That's kind of similar in a way to the electronic voice phenomenon that ghost hunters go for when they're recording, and they get that threshold of just really quiet white noise in the room, and they can pick up voices in that white noise. It seems sort of similar. There's a sound that's sort of acting as a vehicle for the voices.
Yeah. I don't know if it has to do with the electromagnetic or if something's just disturbing the air that's causing it or what, but it's definitely not what you would call a natural phenomena or a natural breeze that comes through because it's just abnormal.
So you couldn't feel it on your skin or anything?
No,
Hmm.
no, there was no nothing on the skin. It was just you could hear it and that was it. I mean, it was just the hearing and no movement, no nothing. And as you just once it came, that's when the whispers came, and then once it got quiet, that's when you started hearing the breaking of branches and leaves cracking.
So that's something that, of course, my mind always goes here. But way out in the mountains in Virginia, um, there are known Sasquatch activity, and oftentimes these sorts of events will occur in relation with the Sasquatch presence. Things like paranormal activity or something that you can't see breaking branches in the forest. Do you have anything that might lend credence to that, or is that totally just not known?
Not, I don't have any experiences with it. I can't say that there's many people that have had Sasquatch experiences out there. No one in my family has known that, but it's the only other experiences I could say would be probably between the paranormal and some space experiences. But that's about the only two.
Like some flying objects?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, we've had some. There's been some strange stuff that's in the skies out that way too, which I don't know if that has to do once again with the Indian folklore or what. It's kind of funny because in a weird way, I kind of feel like they kind of mesh.
yeah, they sort of do in a way. But another thing is just the fact that there's not much light pollution out in a place like that, so you do get a much better look at the sky. But a lot of these UFO sightings tend to take place around mountainous regions like that.
Yeah, and it's the experience if I had too was well, me and my family had was it was not really your typical UFOs either. They were more like kind of like just strange balls of light in the sky. It
Hmm.
wasn't the flashy lights UFOs that everybody usually sees out there, but
So you're not seeing like a saucer.
no saucers, but just strange stuff. And actually, there was one night I actually saw a ball of fire moving across the sky, and it's like, okay, is that a meteor? And then it stops, and it's like, okay, that's strange. Why is
Nope, not a meteor. And how far away, like, was it when you saw it? Do you
uh
think?
I mean it was big enough to where it was like if you look at the moon, it would I would say a quarter size of the moon. So it was big enough to see, and it was just red, and it looked like it was on fire. And it was just the strangest thing because it moved, and it's like, okay, well, that's, yeah, that's a meteor, coming to Earth. But when it stopped is when it was the most puzzling part, because it's like it stopped and then it moved again, and it's like, wait a minute, was that a glitch, or what's going on here? It's that's so abnormal, and it yeah, I can't even explain it. I mean, it's like, because I mean, I know what UFOs are, and it's like, that's not your typical UFO, and I don't even know if I can class it as a UFO or what.
Also in these mountainous regions, you'll often see something that people might call like the spook lights, or in Europe they'd call them the willow of the wisp, and that those will usually be orbs of light, maybe the size of from a softball to like a beach ball, something like that, that sort of dance and move around in the mountains. Do you see anything like that, or are you talking about something way up in the stratosphere?
Nothing in the mountains. It was mostly in the sky, mostly around the sky. Because I mean, you see the horizon of the mountains, and then it would be kind of above, right there with the stars. It's definitely up there in the sky.
Was there any sort of other phenomena that you would see in the sky? That ball of fire is incredibly strange.
Uh, just different. I mean, like I said, just mostly different colored orbs. Like you had blue orbs, white orbs, and they would move very fast, but not too fast to where you would think it was a shooting star. I mean, a shooting star is just like a flash. These things were just like kind of a fast pace, almost like a jet, I guess you could say.
So presumably, with all these sightings that you've had of weird lights in the sky, there's something that's attracting them out here to this mountain or this area. And we could only speculate as to what that is. I think the burial ground angle is a very likely one, because usually when you have these burial grounds, there's just weird stuff going on, and no one knows why.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because for a small town such as Deerfield, it actually has a lot of history. There's a lot of Civil War history out there between the soldiers, the Indians, and it's kind of funny to know how much stuff that's actually happened out there, even though it's so unknown.
And out of the way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
is really interesting. But is there any other weird phenomenon that's going out in those forests?
I mean, besides the whispers, shadows. The only other thing I could say is that there's been sightings of a few strange animals too. My grandmother had experience. She said that she's seen a black panther that was roaming out in the woods out there. Um,
That's not the first time I've heard of that in Virginia.
really?
Yeah, and I mean the Black Panther thing does seem to happen in a lot of places. But I was surprised when I was talking to someone about coming on the show, and he's told me stories before, but when I talked to him about coming on to this show, he told me a new one, which was about a Black Panther in Virginia, and I was completely taken aback because that was the first time I've heard of that. Um, and what we would call this as, or classify this as, is an ABC, meaning alien big cat, a cat that's sort of out of its known environment.
I'm trying to recall her experience, because I mean, I've never actually seen it myself. But for my experience with her and my grandfather, they were basically just driving on the back country roads one day. And it was just, they'd like to go and take rides out and see what they can see, especially with the wilderness and nature and everything. And then all of a sudden, they go around the turn, and next thing you know, they see this black figure just running across the road. And it was just like, okay, wow, that's a big cat, and it's black. And she basically put it. She's like, "That's a panther. It has to be a panther because it had, the characteristics of a cougar, but it was just solid black color." And to this day, she claimed that she's seen it on even to the day she passed. And it's crazy the amount of, like I said, the unknown. You don't know what's out there and what you could see.
Yeah, that is incredibly odd, but not entirely surprising to me, based on what I've heard of these big black cats being out of their normal environment. I mean, people have even filmed these things in England on the countryside, and you do not have any native big cats out there. Yet there one was, a black panther, just wandering around the countryside on video.
Yeah, and this is true. And what's crazy too is the game and wildlife. They'll say that there's no such thing as cougars that live out there, but of course, I completely disagree, and I do think that they not only are native, but they've always been there, and they just kind of kept them hidden just to not scare people from going out hiking and all that stuff because they are dangerous. They can,
Oh, yes.
yeah, very
Those are ambush
dangerous.
predators, and they will attack people.
And it, I think also too is like it's crazy because you see all this evidence of people taking pictures out there of these cougars, and yet you still bring it to them and they're like, "No, that's not real. That's not real. That's just a regular cat or a bobcat or a lynx or something like that." And clearly in the picture you can see it's a mountain lion. It's like there's no doubt about it. It's a mountain lion.
Yeah, when it comes to the officials, this is a very common story, especially in cases of big cats. They'll say, "Oh no, they haven't been in the region for X number of years yet." Trail cams pick them up. It's very rare to have an eyewitness encounter, an eyewitness sighting, but these things they're not at all aware of the trail cameras, and every now and then you'll get that picture snapped on a camera trap. And there's as far as I'm concerned, there are probably even weirder things out there in the George Washington National Forest than just big cats.
Oh yeah, I completely agree too. Like I said, it's just unfortunately, as a child, it's kind of hard to remember everything that you see out there, and it's like the only thing I can have are these faded memories to go by. But it's like you said, there's got to be way more stuff that they're hiding out there because it's a national forest, and it's like okay, what are they protecting?
Yeah.
It's like there's got to be something else there besides just the woods. I mean, like I said, I've never really had experiences with a Bigfoot. I mean, the only thing I could say is that some of my family have seen like, I mean, unless they're coming out at night, that's the only thing I could say because my family has seen shadows run across fields before,
Mm.
and they're not really sure. You can't tell if it's paranormal or cryptid, but they've claimed to see these things.
Yeah, it could be one or the other. I do know that they are generally nocturnal, and some people who are into this field say that the daytime is ours and the nighttime is theirs. Yeah, but continuing on, do you have any other weird stories coming from that area?
I do. Kind of going back to the paranormal stuff. My family actually, my grandmother, she had many experiences. I mean, my grandmother was actually a big fan of the paranormal. She even had books that were based on the paranormal, and I think the only reason why she got these books was because of all of her experiences as when living out in Deerfield, and she actually had experiences with these things. Well, how do I put it? Noises on the roof.
Okay, yeah, that's a very common one.
Roof walkers, I
Yeah.
guess you could say. Yeah, and it was very strange because I mean even my mother even told me about this. She kind of had experiences with it as well when she was a kid, and apparently that was just it sounded like someone was walking on the roof at night, and they would go out, nothing's there. It's like what's making that noise? Go back in, hear it again, and it's like okay, something's what's going on?
Did she say that it sounded like maybe something big, or was it just sort of like a regular footstep kind of thing?
For what I was told, it just sounded like regular footsteps. Like there was actually a person on the roof, just walking on the roof.
Hmm.
And it just every time you go out, it would disappear. It would only happen at night. Um, and it was an ongoing phenomena that happened basically throughout both of their lives.
There was a post on Reddit that I actually read on episode 4, where somebody described exactly the same thing back from like the 1930s or so in, southwestern Virginia, where they had something that was walking on their roof nightly. And they were actually looking for corroboration if anybody else had something like that. This is definitely that corroboration. I don't know if that poster is listening in on this episode, but if you are, that there you go. This is something that does happen to other families as well, not just your grandparents.
I can actually see that too because if they're living on farmlands or living out near the mountains, this must be a common thing that must happen a
Yeah, that's
lot.
why that's why the term roof walker exists. I mean, this does happen to other people.
Huh. Makes you wonder what it is?
Yeah, in different situations, it could be different things, but it seems like there's a lot of stuff out there that likes to get up on the roof and make some noise.
Try to keep people from sleeping.
Yeah.
Oh Lord. Um, But yeah, that experience, and I'm trying to think of what else. Kind of going back to, hiding in the woods again. These experiences of hearing the voices and everything moving around me. I actually even have a close friend who lived out there and had the same experiences, but he actually saw stuff too. He actually saw some strange shadows and beings and everything like that from his experiences. And he actually his was actually a little more intense and climactic compared to what I experienced. But like I said, I really do think it has something to do with the Native American culture. But then again, you never know. It could be something that's from another world or another universe too that's just coming to travel here, because there's many things that are, apparently, like you said, attracted to this certain little area. And
Hmm.
and not only that, but there's also government things that happen out here too with military stuff. There's always military cargo planes that fly over, military copters that fly over this area. There is actually an Air Force that's really close, kind of close to it, over on the other side of the border in West Virginia.
Oh,
So they do radar tests down through this area too. And it's like you have cargo planes that are like literally just a mile off the ground. So they're so low. And it's like, well, what are they doing? And it's like, are they actually testing or are they looking for something?
yeah, that is really suspect. A lot of these places that have weird activity, you'll find there is also that military presence close by. Not in every case, but in a lot of them, yeah. There's just weird stuff going hand in hand with these military bases, and it kind of makes you wonder what came first, the chicken or the egg. Are these places full of weird activity because of the military presence, or is there a military presence because of the weird activity, or is it just coincidence?
I would almost say that the military's knows something's there, but what it is that we will never know because they want to keep it hush hush. There was actually a crazy plane crash story that we had out there back in 2014, and it's the most wild and abnormal plane crash that you ever could hear.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, so there was a fighter jet that was coming from the New England area that apparently was traveling to the southern part of the United States. I'm not really exactly sure what state he was flying to, but it was just him. He was solo. He was flying. I want to say an F-15. I could be wrong about that, but anyhow, it's a military fighter jet that was fully loaded, and he was coming through the valley one day, and it's like all of a sudden, apparently, boom, something caused him to crash and just crash right there in the small town of Deerfield. And it was the most random crash because it's like, what caused this fighter jet to just fall right out of the sky into somebody's field?
Yeah, that does seem like a really random place for a jet to go down. But when you were talking earlier about the strange lights in the sky, it really makes you wonder if those things are connected in any way.
Right. Well, and then here's the weirdest part about it: the pilot was never found when the plane crash happened. Apparently, the pilot ejected from the plane or from the jet, the fighter jet, and people witnessed seeing a chute, but they could never find him once he landed. And even when they went to go see the crash, investigate the crash of the jet, they could not find any cause of what crashed the jet. That's the other strange part. And I mean, they had the FBI, the military police. I mean, it was the whole shebang came out to Deerfield. And then all of a sudden they were there and then they were gone. It was the quickest investigation you've ever seen of a crime scene or a accidental scene, you could say.
Oh man, I'd really like to know more about that. Unfortunately, all of that information, if there was anything weird going on, is probably buried and swept under the rug.
Yeah, if not, yeah, you get a knock on your door saying, "How'd you find this out?" That kind of ordeal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd prefer not to get that knock on the door.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's wild to think that, what abnormal thing could cause a fighter jet just to fall right out of the sky and just, crash, because this was a trained pilot who had experience, many years of experience. I mean, he was a professional. And then not only that, but where did he go? It's like what happened to him? What made him disappear to where they couldn't find him?
Yeah, that is the weird part because, a jet going down could be explained by just some sort of malfunction in the equipment, but a person doesn't just vanish. And normally, when someone deploys their chute, there's some sort of like beacon that they would have, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Or a flare or something, I would think at
Yeah,
least. Yeah.
some way for them to be found because when you go down in a plane and you manage to eject, you're not going to be at the crash site, so you need to have a way of being located.
Yeah. Well, especially in that situation too. It's just, you're by yourself and it's like okay, who you got no one to really call, so it's like who's going to come help you, it's crazy, but yeah, I have no explanation for how that happened or what had happened. It's like you said though, the only thing I could think of was something abnormal that happened to the sky that caused him to crash.
So I'm curious with this story, is there any other similar events that have happened in that area that might corroborate that there's something weird about the area itself causing this, as opposed to just being a sort of freak accident?
I mean, you have other plane crashes too, but they were smaller planes, so it's hard to say. Other than that, I mean, it's like I said, it's so mysterious that you can't even explain it. So you have the paranormal, you have the space. It's yeah, I don't know. I really don't know.
And that's probably about as far as we'll get with these sorts of things, as we just don't know.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned on a previous episode, I think as we learn more about things like quantum physics, perhaps more answers will be revealed in time. But we just have to wait around for that because I personally am not in that field of study, and the information that is found doesn't get disseminated until well after it's been discovered. It takes a while for these sorts of cutting edge discoveries to actually become mainstream and popular knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, and then all of a sudden you have conspiracies and all that stuff and people call you crazy and all that.
And the number of conspiracy theories surrounding the CERN facility is absolutely just mind-boggling. I mean, people talk about, they're opening up portals, they're opening up black holes, it's going to swallow the earth, blah blah blah. And I don't really know enough about any of that to validate those theories. But it is fun to speculate. I totally get where that's coming from.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like I said, it's just, with the Native American community that was out there at one time, what was their beliefs? What did they worship? It's hard to say because there's no info about it. So it's so unknown. Yeah, that's why I call Deerfield. Deerfield is the unknown. It literally is the unknown, and you never know what you're going to see or experience out there.
Yeah, it's another one of those places of just weirdness. And there's quite a few of those all around the United States, if not globally. There's just those places where weird things happen and no one really understands. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just weird.
Yeah. And if you're very adventurous and you want to explore new things, by all means, you'll get excitement by going out there. I mean, it's definitely, I would say, if you're into the unknown and you want to see something that is abnormal, that is one of the best places to go to, for sure. For sure. And even the surrounding areas around it too. I mean, I'm sure you could find a bunch of other stuff too, especially with I'm trying to think of there's two local places I know that are considered haunted by the locals. One of them is actually a pond, a fishing pond.
Which pond is that?
That is Braley's Pond,
Oh, yeah, I'm
supposedly.
familiar.
Yep. Braley's Pond is a fishing pond that they usually stock trout with. And supposedly I've never really had any really paranormal experiences, but there's been weird feelings every time I've gone out there because it's a really quiet place. It's strange, but people have had experiences of seeing shadows and being touched out there, and there's been it's kind of have a history. It's actually there was a person that was actually killed out there, and thrown into the pond itself, but I don't know. I can't explain it myself, but that's supposedly one of the local places that's haunted out there. The other place is the Buckhorn Inn that's out there too.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with the Buckhorn Inn.
Yeah, the Buckhorn Inn supposedly has a ghost, a Confederate ghost that haunts it every so often, and supposedly there's this puddle or a stain, you could say, from back in the Civil War era that it just apparently reappears and it never disappears, and nobody can explain it. But supposedly that's another neat place that's just completely, it's got a lot of paranormal activity, a lot of paranormal experiences from. Yeah, if you can ever get a chance to explore it, definitely explore it for
Yeah,
sure.
that's really interesting. I think I'm gonna definitely have to see if I can dig up stories on the Buckhorn Inn. And I never heard about that about Braley's Pond either. That's out in the George Washington Forest as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, I was just there
Yeah.
this past summer doing some fishing with my nephews.
Yep. Like I said, it's actually a pretty popular pond for fishing.
Oh yeah.
Very popular pond for fishing. And then of course if you're wandering out through the national forest too, like I said, if you come up to a pile of rocks, don't be surprised if that may be something sacred or holy, because it's a possibility that it could be an Indian burial ground for sure.
Well,
So
I do hope to get out in the George Washington Forest a lot more because there are a good number of stories of these sorts of things happening out in that particular forest, and I really want to see if I might be able to perchance have my own experience out there.
yeah, like I said, if you're adventurous and you want to see new things, it's definitely worth taking.
Yeah, well, I fit the bill. Let's go.
Oh,
And like I said before, man, Sasquatch in the George Washington National Forest is not a new thing. And at nighttime, they're if you've got black ones, they can look like shadows and they will knuckle walk.
yeah. I like a almost like an ape of some sort. Yeah. Now it is kind of funny because back then when I was a kid, I had two pets. Well, I actually had a bunch of pets, but I had a dog. I had a border collie, and his name was Jock. And then I had a cat that I basically called Kitty Cat. She was a calico, so she was wild and she always stayed outside. And every time I would go out on my adventures by myself, walking out through the woods, they would usually follow me and keep me company sometimes. And then there was one day, it was kind of strange because it was a weird evening where I was walking and I was following Jock, my dog at the time. And I heard this weird noise out in the distance into the woods, and he stops. And I'm like, I hear it, but I don't mind it. I keep walking towards him. All of a sudden, he turns around and he starts growling at me. And I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? And I'm like, calm down. It's easy, Jock. Relax.
Yeah,
What?
you wouldn't expect them to be growling at you.
Yeah. And I'm like, why are you growling at me? And then he stopped. He looked back towards where the noise came from. And then so I started walking forward again, not knowing. And then he turned right back around, faced me again. He started growling at me again, except it was more aggressive. And I was like, okay, yeah, guess we're not going on an adventure today. So I'm gonna head back to the house. And so I turned around and I walked back, and he just kind of kept going towards the noise, like he was going to go and investigate it. But it was so strange because it was almost like he knew that was something wrong, and he didn't want me to tag along or go towards the sound or whatever it was that was.
So could you describe the noise that was emitted out in the forest?
It, the noise, well, when I was a kid, I mean, the noise sounded animalistic to me because I was a kid. And I not knowing it, Jock didn't think it was something. It was completely different because he lived out in the woods. Like I mean, he basically knew every animal, everything that was out there, and so that this noise was so abnormal to him that it put him on alert mode. And it that's what kind of surprised me. It was like, okay, this is no abnormal noise. It was just a loud screech. And me, of course, thinking it was like, oh, okay, well, that's just probably sounds like a bird. It's probably just a bird of some sort, but it was you know it- nothing normal to me as being a kid.
Right.
And, you know, living out there, I know some of the animal noises like a fox and, the loud bark of a fox or loud screech of a fox, bobcats and everything like that. But yeah, this wasn't normal. This wasn't normal.
Yeah, he
And
wouldn't react that way to the sound of a bird or a fox, would he?
no, no, I mean, and that's kind of what made it odd. That's what made it such an odd experience is like, all right, what is it that you see that I don't see? And it's like, what do you know that I don't know? And what are you protecting me from that I don't know what it is?
And that's the special thing about dogs is they have that sense for when something is unusual or different or something to be, kind of aware of when it comes to these weird abnormal phenomenon. Because they're not going to react in a aggressive manner. Well, I mean, they will act aggressively towards a bird, but they're not going to basically turn around and tell you to go home if there's a screech owl or something in the area. What he was doing was alerting you like something is not right here. You better get back.
Right, exactly. I mean, he was protecting me from whatever it was that was out there in the woods. And honestly, the craziest thing is I kind of wish I knew what it was. I wanted, to this day, the curiosity of knowing what is it? What was it that he was protecting me from?
Well, there's only one way to find out. We're gonna have to go back out there.
Yep, I agree. I think so too. I mean, you- I don't know. I kind of want to do that too, especially is just go out there and explore more. And I mean, it's the unknown.
Oh
It
yeah,
truly is.
I'd love to because the George Washington National Forest fascinates me. Now, I don't normally have any kind of weird experiences when I go out to these sorts of places, but at the very least, you can just enjoy the beauty of the nature of it. It's a very gorgeous area.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a gift to say the least. It's Mother Nature's truest gift. I mean, if you love mountains and nature in the forest, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm extremely thankful because when I was younger, I kind of grew up a little bit in Northern Virginia, but we came down here and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so lonely." But I realized that, if you've got all this forest area, you don't need friends quite as much, to be honest. I know it sounds a little crazy, but there's so much to do when you're faced with wide open spaces.
Oh yeah, I mean it's peaceful too. That's the other thing too. It just the atmosphere of being surrounded by a natural environment instead of concrete people and all that. You're away from all the stress, all the negative energy, and out there the energy is just a complete opposite. I mean it's just so positive, peaceful, calming, relaxing. It's why people get away.
It is. It just kind of washes away a lot of that pent up, distress that you feel from normal everyday life.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely the cure. If you're depressed, it's definitely the cure. I
Mm,
can say at least.
I think so.
Yep, definitely, definitely.
Those were a really good bunch of stories that you brought with us or brought for us today. I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. And do you have any sort of thing that you would like to plug while we're still here?
The only thing I can say is be careful if you go out in the woods alone. I mean that's basically it. And make sure you know your environment. Watch for things, listen for things. I mean, just stay alert if you're hiking alone. Usually, I would say don't hike alone, but there's some days that people just want to do it, have the urge to do it, and just be careful if you do it.
Yeah, that's a good bit of advice. Personally, I love hiking alone. It makes me, feel very like I said, it washes away a lot of that distress. But when you start listening to the stories that people have to share who have encountered weird things out in the forest, they'll tell you you don't want to hike alone and you do not want to hike unarmed. And how much truth there is to that? Well, I think according to them, that is the only way that they'll ever get back out in the woods after what they've seen. So take from that what you will.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agreed. Yep.
Yeah, I think for the most part, when it comes to some of these things, if you make it clear to them that you're not there to bother them or to be bothered, then it should be just okay.
Like I said, just be yourself and just watch if you've come up upon something. Be careful. Be respectful. Just don't intrude. Don't be an intruder. Don't try to aggravate anything that you come upon, even if it's nature too. I mean, if you come on a bear, you want to be as peaceful as you can, walk slowly by it, just be respectful to nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically it.
Yep. When you see a bear, don't run.
Yep.
That's for sure.
Yep.
I had a good experience when I was out in Washington State hiking on the Olympics. Not this past summer, but the one before, actually. There was a big black bear just sort of hanging out by the side of the trail. And a bunch of other hikers had stopped us and alerted us to it. And they were, getting away out of that area. They were supposed to be going towards it, and they saw it, and they turned around and came back. And we were like, oh, it's a bear. Exciting. So we just walk by it and say, hi, bear. And it looks at us, and it goes, oh, crap. And it runs off.
Yeah, I mean, mostly with black bears, you definitely don't want to show that you're afraid of it. That's the worst thing you could ever do for black bears, because if you show that you're afraid or intimidated by it, they might take the advantage and try to do something.
Yeah, when it comes to creatures like that, they're very much non-confrontational. They don't want to have to fight a fight if they don't have to, right? So if you make yourself look like an intimidating challenge, then they're not going to take you up on it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's like, I mean, they have the same perspective as you.
Mm-hmm.
You leave it alone, they're going to leave you alone. And that they're thinking the same thing. You leave me alone, I'm going to leave you alone. So it's,
yeah, they don't want no
based on
trouble,
that.
just like you don't.
Yep.
So just give them a little bit of space and don't act cowardly.
Yep. Agreed with that.
Yeah. So in conclusion, once again, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've had a great time talking to you. And if you do have any other experiences pop up, you should give me a text or a call. Let me know, and I'd love to share more about what happens.
Definitely. Thank you for bringing me out here. I mean, it's like I said, I'm glad I was able to share these stories with you and with everyone that's listening. Like I said, and if you're adventurous, go explore the unknown. Do it. I mean, your life is short, man.
And there you have it, everyone. That was Dexter recalling his stories in Deerfield. And just to kind of drive home how rural of an area that is, according to the 2010 census, Deerfield had a population of 132. That's really small. So yeah, the place is sparsely populated. It's far out. And there were a few things that Dexter touched on in his interview that I wanted to look into. First of all, with the burial mounds. From what I've been able to dig up, the Cherokee tribe actually did exist within Virginia to the west of the Blue Ridge Mountains, putting a huge probability that they could have been in the Deerfield area. And looking into their burial practices, they did use stone heaps to bury their dead. So these things are kind of lining up. What he was experiencing out there might be a legitimate Cherokee burial ground. I also looked into the fighter jet crash. This occurred in 2014. Many news outlets did pick up the story. And apparently there was an F-15 en route from Barnes National Air Base in Massachusetts down to the Naval Air Station in Louisiana, New Orleans. And the pilot lost contact with air traffic controllers somewhere around Washington, D.C. at about 9:05 a.m. They don't know why the jet went down, but it went down in the densely forested mountains there around Deerfield. They deployed a 150-man search team, and they were able to recover the body of the pilot. But it's still a mystery as to why the jet did go down. Dexter also mentioned that Braley Pond was a haunted location. I'd never heard of this before. I've been to Braley's Pond plenty of times, gone fishing there, and it's really a kind of a serene and lovely little area. So I looked into it, and Dyrt magazine did a write-up on Braley Pond. That's Dyrt magazine, DYRT, if you want to look into it for yourself. But they wrote that Braley's Pond is not only considered to be one of the most haunted areas in Virginia, but possibly the entire U.S., which really shocked me. I would never have thought that. And on May 22nd, 2003, according to the magazine, 19-year-old Christopher S. Kennedy was murdered at Braley Pond by local gang members. They stabbed him 13 times in the chest and the back and then dumped his body into the water. The article goes on to talk about a paranormal investigation. If you're interested in that, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the show notes so you can read up a little more about the Braley Pond haunting. But I'd like to go back out there again and just kind of reassess the area. It's always been a very calming and peaceful place for me. And the last thing I wanted to look into that Dexter had mentioned was the Buckhorn Inn in Churchville, Virginia. According to Virginia.org, the building has been standing since 1811 and was briefly used as a Confederate Army hospital. And with just a little bit of digging, I was able to find a group online called the Twisted Paranormal Society, and they have a investigatory documentary series called The Twisted Realm. In Season 2, Episode 5, they have a paranormal investigation of the Buckhorn Inn. It's available on Amazon Prime. If you're interested, go ahead and look into that. I think I'm going to go ahead and do that myself. So I'm off to watch a paranormal investigation. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show, and good night, everybody.